All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. Doesn't look like there's an everyone watching right now, so it's just us. It seems. Uh, well, hello. It is I, your favorite Jackson. Maybe we'll get some people joining momentarily. We shall see. So welcome. We don't have any special guests today, other than our usual special guests, like host and co-host Peter of Gonna Go For It fame.
Hello.
Welcome,
There's
welcome. And
there's no one. Okay, this is weird. Usually we have a
sometimes got
few
some people.
people around, which
Oh, that's okay. They'll come in or they won't. Either way.
yeah,
Okay, and then we also
they're
have.
coming in now. They're coming in now. We have four. So
Oh, there's
see,
Smitty.
there's the first one.
Hello. Um, and we also have one of my editors, Nestlig. Welcome back.
Hello.
How you doing?
Trying not to doom scroll too much.
Hard not to do that.
Yeah.
Quite difficult in this time, in these trying times. Um, we have put out now our first political videos. Yay! um, for anyone who's not aware, we wrote a few scripts, and I'm going to put those out, and then we'll get back to the Ancestor's Tale and finish it up. We're getting pretty close to the Ancestor's Tale. We're almost there. Fewer. I think we only have 9 videos left in the Ancestor's Tale. We are almost to the end. We're nearly there.
Considering what's been happening, be careful with your political videos. Don't be too specific. I mean,
can I offer you an egg in these trying times? You can. You absolutely can.
Yeah.
Did you guys get an ad for this show? Then we get before the show started, because it does seem odd. That never happens.
Was there an advertisement before?
Or no, I did it like show like, hey, in 30 minutes gonna start the stream, because this never happens. It's very weird.
I haven't been getting those for half a year. So
weird. Okay, my Atkinson says she did not. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know
okay,
why,
did.
but YouTube seems to turn that off and on as they please, because I used to get those. I don't anymore.
Weird. Okay, well, at any rate, okay, so yeah, we did our first couple of videos on politics, history. So the first one we did was the War on Science, in which we gave a brief overview. Both of the videos are almost 30 minutes long. We have a brief overview of the forces of darkness that have attempted to subvert science in this country. Our video kind of starts with the fight to pull like kids out of the workforce, the fight for the 8-day work week, and then we move forward from there because you have this, you have like progressive movements in the 19 teens, 20s, 30s, and then those movements, and then of course you had the New Deal, and then following from the New Deal, you had the backlash against the New Deal with the neoliberal politics of the really late 1970s is kind of when you start getting those sorts of policies implemented, and then 80s, 90s, and to today, we've really we've really turned up the libertarian, free market, fundamentalist sorts of policies here in the U.S., and so those also flowed from ultimately neoliberalism, which is kind of odd because we think, okay, liberal means left, but neoliberalism is classical liberalism, which is about freedom, and in this case, it's freedom of the market, is being applied by, you have like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek in the 1950s and 60s, and that idea sort of came from like John Stuart Mill you had in the 1850s, 1860s, and so he had applied his ideas of liberalism, which date to like the 1600s with John Locke. Those ideas get applied to economics because of you have your sort of foundational texts of capitalism in the 1770s, i.e., the wealth of nations. And so these, so while um, Adam Smith was um, much more in favor of social safety nets than any of our modern sort of libertarian guys are. He's been kind of misinterpreted in that sort of respect, and so now we have this crazy version of. Oh, I did not get the 30-minute notification, but I got the live notification. Okay, interesting. Oh, I'm gonna make. Let's see. Let's make him. See, as moderator. There we go. And RJ, since you're in there, if I'm saying anything wrong, feel free. But we typically don't think of liberals. We think of liberals as being on the left, but liberalism is just the philosophy of freedom. And so neoliberalism of the 1950s was classical liberalism, but being applied to economics. It was a rebirth of liberalism, which is called neoliberalism, which means new liberalism, as in new freedom of the free markets. And so these sorts of policies were taken advantage of, or these policies were pushed by industries and have been taken advantage of by industries to lie about, like, say, fossil fuels and their harm to the environment, the negative externalities of these practices, right? Of like manufacturing things on this mass scale. You also have anthropogenic acid rain, and you have the hole in the ozone layer, which we've now managed to. We passed policies that have gone a long way towards fixing the hole in the ozone. It's been closing up since we stopped making products that had chlorofluorocarbons in it, and then there's the industrial assault on science, and then there's the media assault on science, which we pointed out that journalists aren't so much like, they're not intentional with their attacks on science. It's more they give a platform, an uncritical platform, to people who lie about science, like climate change deniers and anti-vaxxers and things like this. And then you also have, of course, the religious attack on science. So creationists, intelligent design proponents, all these different groups that, again, kind of amassed over the course of decades. You had Paul Weyrich, who was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation in the 1970s. He also, Joseph Coors, of Coors beer, was one of the founders of the Heritage Foundation. And so then Weyrich went on with Jerry Falwell and Bob Jones to found the Moral Majority in the late 1970s, and as a response to Roe v. Wade, as well as other things like desegregation. But it was a bit harder by the late 1970s to motivate people around being opposed to desegregation. So anyway, so we talked about that, about all these different attacks on science, the right wing, the political right wing in this country, the religious right, all that sort of stuff. And then in addition, and then in addition to that, we did a video on what we called asymmetric propaganda. So we talked about the ways in which propaganda on the right differs from propaganda on the left. And so we looked at a few different papers on the distribution of media and how people take in media. So, for instance, the right wing media sources like Breitbart, like Fox News, etc., these anchor the right wing, and that's just kind of what people on the right wing read or listen to. Whereas if you're on the left wing or the center, you take in a much greater range of media. So someone on the left wing is not just reading, left publications. They're also reading center publications. Funny enough, nobody's really reading center-right publications. So right-wing publications that are like anti-Trump, for instance, basically get no views at all. Nobody cares about them because at this point you're either a fascist, right? You're a member of the Trump party, or you're everybody else. So nobody really cares about the anti-Trump right-wing people. I mean, there are a few people, but not very many of them.
I sometimes see like the Lincoln Project
Yeah, they
on
are.
Twitter, but
They
they are like
disappeared.
they are
Uh,
like one guy in the crowd
mhm.
shouting boo, all the rest are shouting yay.
Well, if you remember, they kind of disappeared right after um,
Hmm.
right after Biden got elected. They just like were gone, and then when Trump came back, you're right. I see them every so often, but not very much. But statistically speaking, most people just don't read center right publications. That's just not a thing. Um, and so we talk about asymmetric propaganda. We talk about different. Trump is the ultimate culmination of American conservatism. Well, his cabinet is certainly. I don't know if he. I don't know if he is in particular, but his cabinet certainly is.
No,
Um,
I think he's like I think he is more of a symptom because like
mm,
the groundwork for his rise was already laid down. Like there is a clip that is like living rent free in my head. Like when John McCain was like talking to an old lady who was like
yeah, we
Obama. He was an Arab. He's an
did you
Arab.
see it? I put it in the
Ob-
video.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. I thought of that exact thing, that exact clip, because it's a beautiful clip, and so if anyone here hasn't watched the asymmetric propaganda video, highly recommend, because I do put that clip in there just because it's such a such a good like distillation of the difference between the current Republican Party and the Republican Party of 10 years, or not even 10 years, more than that. What what 12 years ago? How long ago was that?
I think like this is when John McCain was
Oh
running
God,
for
that was
for
yeah. So
two.
that was 2008. So that
Yeah,
was it was
so 2087,
yeah.
2007
So
probably.
we're
Yeah.
almost so 18 years ago. Yeah. How fun is
Hmm.
that? That was 18 years ago. Wow. Yikes. Hard to believe. Um. So anyway, so we did that. So the next video in the we've got, I think, two more political videos, and then we'll get back to the the ancestor's tale, so we can round that out. The other political videos are one is titled "The Dangers of Both Sidesism," where we talk about social issues on the left versus on the right, which one is better at social issues, and then a really fun one we're going to talk about. The next video after that is we found a paper that compares the economy, the U.S. economy, under different presidents going back to really it focuses on Truman to today, but it does also it later adds FDR and Hoover to their analysis and shows that, I mean, FDR is kind of an outlier in terms of like GDP growth because he was in for 4 terms. So, but if you go from Truman to oh,
Oh, sorry.
there it goes. But if you go from Truman to today, even still, you have higher GDP growth under Democrats versus under conservatives, and or under Republicans, really. And so we have a paper that we've found is from, I think it's from 2013, and we're going to go through the econometrics of different presidents to really end the notion of conservatism, Republicans being the party of fiscal responsibility. So anyway, okay.
Nestle, I
Fun.
think I
Is my
found the
mic still acting
problem.
up again, or
Yeah, I think I found the problem. You're holding your lightsaber too close to the mic, and that's what's causing it. But you're good now.
And then for the ancestor's tale, the next one is the polypifer's tale, which is a fancy way of saying coral. It's an old way of saying coral. And then it's the sponge's tale, and then the choanoflagellates. But so yeah, we do the sponge, and then we leave the animals for good after like 50 like 52 or 3 episodes of being in the animals. So yeah, long time.
You're not
So
going to
anyway.
do the dire wolf's tale?
No. You know, I told my students about that in my biology class. I actually, so a couple weeks ago we did the history of doing of changing the genetics of organisms, the genes of organisms. So first, of course, I talk about um, breeding organisms. You know, we've been breeding organisms for thousands of years. So I talk about dogs and cows and chickens and all that sort of stuff, and wheat and whatnot, and corn. And then I go from that to transgenic organisms. Sorry, no, hybridization. We talk about hybridization next. You know, like hybridizing corn to produce better yielding strains, and then from there we talk about transgenic organisms, which apparently have been confused for transgender organisms in the news recently, which is
Mhm.
very funny.
I hate this timeline. I really hate
Yeah.
the timeline we are on.
Yeah.
I hate
So
I
that
hate
was
the
very.
fact I hate the fact being Dutch, and I'm pretty sure Nestle can confirm this, that it was an orange guy who misinterpreted that term. As,
Yeah.
as you might know, orange is the color that Dutch people like to display in sports. So we need a different color, Nestle. What do we do?
um. So then we talked about transgenic organisms, and I did actually bring up. I mentioned to them one of the papers that was cited on the White House website, and explained without invoking the White House directly. Explained why would we need to do this sort of research? What would be the benefit of it? Well, there are lots of really good reasons to give testosterone to female mice because human females take testosterone and not transgender ones. Most testosterone that women take goes towards women with who are facing menopause because what it does, or it does a number of things actually. One of the things it does is it increases libido, and so women who are facing menopause or in menopause take testosterone. Like that's just a normal thing that happens. But of course, most guys probably don't know that because they don't know anything about women physiology or reproductive anatomy at all. You know, there's a famous joke about not being able to find the clitoris. So,
Mhm.
um, so if you don't know anything about female physiology at all, then yeah, you might be tempted to think like, oh, well, why would we spend money on making mice transgender? And that's not
Yeah.
what we're doing, but okay. Um, and
You know, I am waiting for for something to happen where they they will they already want to ban certain key terms in like public schools, like I don't know, more climate change and
mhm.
such. So I'm waiting for them to like ban the word trans, and then they find out that like chemistry often uses the word trans to refer to like certain chemical reactions, like trans isomerization, for example. And then they probably are going to complain like, oh, even chemistry has been taken over by this gender ideology. I'm waiting for that to happen. Seriously, I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, actually, something similar has already happened, believe it or not, Nestling.
Hmm.
So, on the I believe it was Department of Defense website, a very famous a page about a very famous plane was removed, and it was removed because the name of the plane was the Enola Gay. Now, for anyone who's not aware,
I don't know. Yeah. Mhm.
the Enola Gay was the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Now, that name, Enola Gay, is the name of the pilot's mother. So he just named the plane after his mother. Um, the page about the plane was removed from the Department of Defense website because it has the word gay in it.
Hmm.
So any page that had like gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, whatever, it was just like a find, like Control F. They just basically Control F the whole database and deleted every page that had that in it. Now, all of these pages have since been returned because that was illegal. Trump can't just unilaterally do that. That's illegal. But it was very stupid, and we all got to laugh at him for it because he's very stupid and his administration is very stupid.
Yeah.
A similar thing that I wanted to mention is something I put here in the description. If you guys want to take a look, this article at Higher Ed Dive, federal judge freezes Energy Department 15% cap on indirect costs. So this article is relaying a series of things that have been happening recently. So when Trump first got into office, one of the immediate things he did was he signed an executive order, and this video that we're going to talk about, we'll go into this a bit further. He signed an executive order putting a 15% cap on indirect costs for grants, essentially. So when a group of scientists receives a grant to do some research, a percentage of that grant goes towards administrative costs and goes towards maintaining the facility in which they are doing the research. That's called indirect costs because it's not directly going to the research. It's going to the maintenance of the building, as well as the making sure that people get paid for their work and all that sort of stuff, and have an HR department and all that. Well, Trump signed an executive order capping indirect costs at 15%, which again is illegal. He can't do that. He doesn't have the power of purse. So he can't unilaterally do that. So that order was immediately rebuffed. But the Department of Energy tried doing the same thing. They tried also putting a 15% cap on indirect costs. And a federal judge froze that. Now what's bizarre to me is we spend, as Nestling and I talked about in our video, Jim Jordan versus Plankton. I should have linked that in the description, but you can all look it up later. As we talked about in that video, federal funding for non-military science is about 1% of the budget. Right, Nestling?
I believe it's about like 0.3, if I remember correctly.
There. So it's less than 1%. Let's round it up just to be nice. Let's say it's 1% of the budget.
Yeah.
Additionally, Peter, could you pull up the image, please?
Oh, yes.
Additionally, U.S. foreign aid, so aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, aid to South Africa, whatever, also makes up about 1% of our budget. I've seen about 1.2%. So if you look at this chart that Peter has pulled up, you can see U.S. government income and expenditures for the fiscal year 2024. Okay, so this is most recent. So if you look at our largest expenditures, it's Social Security, health. What's that? What does it say? Net interest. There we go. And then Medicare. There we go. Okay. Social Security, health, net interest, Medicare, national defense, income security, etc. Okay, so if you look at that and you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the image, you see other. Less than 2% of our total expenditures is non-military science, because military science falls under national defense, of course, and U.S. foreign aid. U.S. foreign aid doesn't even appear as a category on this chart. And yet, if you listen to the news right now, and you listen to the news for the past month, the programs that the Republicans want to cut the most are 1, non-military science, and 2, U.S. foreign aid. I personally, and Nestle and Peter, you guys can disagree with me if you want, I think that's insane. Nestle, what do you think about this?
I actually would disagree. I think this is very deliberate because like it's the same thing like when authoritarians want to erode human rights, they don't like go after everybody at once. They at
Sure.
first target minority groups, like the people who have the least power and the least ability to resist the erosion of human rights. That's where it starts. And the same thing is happening here. They always start at the very tiny bits of the budget, so they later can justify the erosion of healthcare and social security. That's the plan. So
Mm.
that seems to be the plan to me at least. So it's not insanity, it's just pure evil. That's to
Sure.
me. Yeah.
Sure. That's fair. That's fair. I agree with
Yeah.
that. Yeah. This the Trump administration and um, Elon Musk, who did a National Socialist salute at Trump's inauguration, not once but twice. Um, them cutting microscopic fractions of the budget when there are much bigger things they could be cutting, or conversely, they could be raising tax rates for the upper class, right? These are things they could be doing
But
to
then they would be raising their own taxes because they are all
true.
billionaires in the cabinet.
That is
Almost all of them.
true.
Over half, like 60% are in the billionaire class.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, are you saying Triceratops YAC learn Chicago style challenge? Also what he's saying. Okay, let's see. I was saying what's he saying? Okay. Yeah, they're justifying these cuts a number of different ways. One, they're saying, well, researchers are funding transgender science. Or sorry, the government's funding transgender science that these researchers are doing. Which I think he means transgenic, because you can't really make mice
Yeah.
transgender.
Yeah.
Transgender is a way of living, like it's a gender, right? It's the way that you express yourself.
You also have you also have Alex Jones saying like they are turning the frogs gay, but it turns out like you have this one chemical that is like affecting the sexual differentiation of amphibians. There is some truth to that about like this chemical at a certain,
But it was
at a
pollution,
certain
wasn't
dose. Sorry.
Wasn't that was pollution though, wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yeah, that was pollution. Yeah, it was pollution. Yeah, it alters the sexual differentiation of amphibians. It
Right.
doesn't have the same effect in humans, but of course there's like a little bit of truth to it. But the way Alex Jones puts it is very very false. Like they
Right.
don't become gay.
Right. They're not becoming gay. It's interfering with their sexual
Their
differentiation.
sexual development.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, yeah. So suffice to say, the situation in the U.S. as it continues is quite dire. Our government is really daily chipping away at democracy, at sanity. There's a really good quote, and I don't remember who said it. Someone in the live chat can find it. The quote is, "There is a group of people for whom the law protects but does not bind, and there's a group of people for whom the law binds but does not protect." And it feels right now like, I mean, maybe it always was that way, but perhaps. But the way it feels right now is the law binds basically all U.S. citizens but does not protect us, and the law protects the Trump administration but does not bind any of them. Is the way it feels, at least to me. I could be wrong.
I think that's fairly accurate.
So yeah, so that's where we are. So anyway, Nestle, do you want to add anything to that?
I think we have said enough about this.
Okay, fair enough. So now we're going to turn over to our video and see what they have to say about the executive orders. I'm kind of curious. This group is, I'm not sure if they're going to agree with the executive orders or not, or because it's a guy being interviewed by the host of this group called, I think it's called Heterodox Academy. And I first came across this channel because a friend of mine sent me one of their videos that was about something that I do think is a little absurd. It is, and this is again kind of that there's an element of truth to it, but they take it too far. They had an archaeologist on who talked about the absurdity of like some journals, some archaeological journals will not allow you to have pictures of human remains anymore. You have to draw them. And I do think that's a little absurd. I do also think that if there is a question of who certain remains belong to, then there should be a good faith effort to acquire that information before you write a paper on them. That's just my opinion also. But it seems like that is something that would be relatively easy to accomplish. But this archaeologist kind of doesn't talk about that. She just kind of talks. The archaeologist from that video, all she kind of talks about is she's like, oh, well, they won't let you have pictures of human remains anymore. It's like, okay, well, you're right. I agree. That's a little silly. But she doesn't at all say a way we could solve this dilemma is by contacting, like, if you're doing like Native American stuff, for instance, contact the local tribe. If it turns out that these people belonged to that tribe, then say, hey, is it okay if we use this stuff, or would you just like it returned? Right? Am I crazy? Like, I feel like that'd be something relatively easy to do.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. So it's I don't know. But anyway, so then I was kind of like, interesting. So I clicked around on some other videos on this channel, and one of them is this one. And at the time, this was right after the executive order kind of came down, so I was curious to see what their opinion on it is. So I haven't watched this yet. So, all right, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, let's.
The EO, the executive order, was part of a suite of what a lot of people are seeing as an attack on science, an attack on, whether you want to call it an attack on inquiry or just an attack on research and researchers and their budgets and their work, that even if all of it gets rolled back, which seems unlikely, but even if all of it will get rolled back, whether it's a court order or they roll it back because it is no longer the most popular part of what he's doing, et cetera, it's causing such consternation and such, honestly, existential dread among scientists that they are leaving the field or deciding not to do something. That, to me, hard to measure, but pernicious and probably a bigger problem.
Oh, pause for a second. I would 100% agree with that. Something I forgot to mention earlier. The consequences of getting rid of those two very small things, very small parts of the budget, is actually quite large, globally speaking. Because we are, to go back to the economic stuff we were talking about earlier, if you're a firm, if you're a technological firm and you're competing with other firms around the world, right? You want there to be scientists who are doing work. Private funding for science is comparatively pretty small, as near as I understand it, compared to federal funding. And so a lot of firms rely on...
When it comes to research, yes.
Right.
Maybe if you include applied sciences, then probably the private sector is bigger. Like it depends on what type
like
of
basic research. It's the federal funding is a lot bigger.
Yes.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with like applied research, like technology, for instance. I'm sure a lot of that is privately funded because Apple wants to make new phones or tablets or whatever, and there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are putting in money to make new drugs, new heart monitors and things like this. So yeah, they're going to be funding the application stuff, but a lot of the core, the basic science upon which all of these applications are built, that's all federal. That's almost all federal funding. When you look at like medical genetics, for instance, genetics is founded on, that little monk who was in a monastery, Gregor Mendel, And I mean that's even prior to federal funding. He was just doing research, on his own time in a monastery. And then you also have Thomas Hunt Morgan, who did work with fruit flies, and that was almost certainly federal funding because it was at a university. Um,
Sounds to me we're wasting a lot of money on fruit fly research.
yeah, thank you, Sarah Palin. Yeah.
Yeah. No, also the recent thing about have you seen that shrimp treadmill? I think you have seen it too, right?
Yes.
People complaining about that.
So the thing with that was, because actually I had to
Yeah.
explain to somebody, the money went to his program, but he paid out of pocket for the shrimp treadmill thing. That was like $70 out of his own pocket. None of the federal funding went to the shrimp treadmill, whatever. But however, even that aside, I can easily think of a reason that we would want to know the speed at which shrimp move. Is not shrimping an industry in the US? Like, hello? Wouldn't you want to know how fast shrimp migrate annually so that you know where to go shrimping? Am I crazy? That seems like something you would want to know. How fast do shrimp move? Where are they usually found this time of year? So where can you can predict where they might end up? I don't know. That just seems to me like that'd be something that we would want to know about. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know. But still. So
if we were living in the Stone Age, those people would be laughing at other people who were burning rocks, and it turns out they are smelting iron for the first time or something. This is pretty much the same that we are dealing with now. They are deeply incurious and just they just assume that it must be stupid because they don't understand the point of something.
There's a good quote I've seen. Everything is a conspiracy when you don't know anything.
Yeah,
and I kind of go back and forth, and I don't know if RJ's still in the chat. Maybe he can weigh in on this. I think that a lot of people are I'm not gonna say they're dishonest. I just think they don't know anything. Your average American, I know it's no shock to the Dutch here, the average American does not know anything about science. The average American does not know anything about history. And so
it's not their fault, I would say. It's not their fault.
Oh, I agree. It's not their fault. I mean, we're going to do a video at some point defending public education and another one defending academia. Yeah, give me a second. Hold on. But you're right. It's not necessarily their fault. It is that there are forces in this country, again, largely conservative, that have been opposed to the Department of Education literally since its inception. I believe it was Jimmy Carter.
And this is the exact goal, because when the masses become uneducated, they are easily manipulated like this. This is the whole point of defunding education.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's literally the only reason.
Yeah, and it's not even just defunding education; it's also funding people to lie, funding Prager University to host a bunch of people who lie about climate change or anthropogenic acid rain or the hole in the ozone layer. These people are paid to lie by vested industry interests. Okay, Frederick Seitz was another one. He lied on behalf of the tobacco industry. Fred Singer lied on behalf of the oil industry. You had William Nierenberg, Robert Jastrow. These guys were all paid to lie. I think they're all dead now, but they were all paid to lie. And it was from them that climate conspiracies spread so far, right? Because they had this air of authority that they just had to go to a newspaper and write an editorial. That's all they had to do. And so anyway, so the downside of all of this of defunding science is that we are going to slip further and further and further intellectually in the world. We are going to be outcompeted by China and by Japan and by these other countries who conservatives are always fear mongering about. We're going to be outcompeted by them. They're going the lion's share of the research that's going to be done in the world is going to come from them. The scientists who are here in the U.S. are going to go to China, are going to go to Japan, England, the Netherlands, France. They're going to go elsewhere to do this research. That's going to be a brain drain on the U.S. And again, talking about historical parallels, the same thing happened in Nazi Germany right before the Holocaust.
Mhm.
You know, a few people you may have heard of before, you know, like Albert Einstein, for instance. You know, the family of Robert
Oh yeah.
Oppenheimer was another one.
Mhm.
They
Niels Bohr.
fled. Yep, Niels Bohr. Yeah, these guys fled Germany because it was becoming fascistic, and people and scientists are going to start, among other people, are going to start fleeing the United States because it's becoming fascistic, or is becoming more fascistic, I guess I should say. And then the same with U.S. foreign aid. That is an instance of soft power, right? So we're not fighting on behalf of somebody else or fighting other countries. We are providing them with the means either to defend themselves in the case of like Ukraine or Israel, whatever, or we're giving them food and medical supplies, like in the case of Palestine or in the case of like South Africa, like preventing HIV, things like that. This is how we maintain power in the world, right? This is how we are able to shape foreign policy in ways that are positive to the United States because we put in money and time and effort, right? That's how we're able to have positive relationships with other countries. And I just don't think the Trump administration just understands that at all. Andrew Cummings says, do you think that's one reason why we've seen a rising distrust in scientists recently, since many people seem to think doctors and medical professionals lied to them during the pandemic? Yeah, yes, I agree, Andrew. I think that is absolutely correct. Republicans lied about every single aspect of the pandemic. Remember, don't let them pretend that they didn't. Remember, Elon Musk said he didn't expect there'd be 6,000 total cases, like ever, of COVID. Don't let him forget that.
Yeah.
Remember
and that is also the that is also the point when Elon Musk became like full on like Trump and such. Like before COVID, Elon was like almost like a LARPing as a liberal, almost.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like oh, I got these cool electric vehicles against climate change. Yeah. Like something like, but then after that, like now he's just full on a Trump supporter and such. Yeah. And the reason why, like, COVID lockdowns were like threatening his business, and he didn't like that. That's the only reason why he was against the COVID stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he was probably always somewhat conservative. I mean, he's been friends with Peter Thiel since the early 2000s, so wouldn't be surprised. But you're right. Remember, they lied about the severity of COVID. It was much more severe than they initially claimed, or than anyone initially claimed. Remember, they lied about ivermectin, saying ivermectin was that you could take it either as a prophylactic or to treat COVID. That's still not true to this very day. And I'll say this, I'll be honest. I actually fell for some of the propaganda. Not that I ever took ivermectin. I got a shot and a booster for COVID. What I fell for, however, was there was an article there was actually two articles that came out that were claiming to have demonstrated conclusively that ivermectin can be used to treat COVID-19. Both of those articles were retracted, by the way. They were heavily criticized.
It was a French study, right? I remember this.
You're probably right. I don't quite remember. But I fell for that because I saw that these conservatives were like, look, ivermectin is claim. We have this double-blind, placebo controlled test that claims ivermectin, works at it was high concentrations, and I was like, Okay, I mean, it does have broad spectrum antiviral properties, so not super surprising. Okay, that was wrong. Those studies got retracted. Their methodology got ripped apart, and to date, the World Health Organization, the like CDC, all these organizations still say, based on good data, do not take ivermectin for COVID. It does not help you. It also doesn't taste good.
It only makes it, like I've seen, it makes it worse. Like the chances of survival just goes down with ivermectin.
No, that might be the
Yeah.
case. At the very best, it doesn't do anything for you, is what we can say.
Yeah, at the very best. Yeah.
At the very best, it does nothing for you. Trump specifically pushed hydroxychloroquine, which will kill you, by the way. Several people died. They took hydroxychloroquine and died. There, you can find multiple stories about that.
I've seen like there was like a couple who took like something that you use to treat an aquarium against parasites for your fish.
Mm-hmm.
And the couple took that stuff, and the husband died, and the wife was hospitalized. Yeah, it's crazy. Are you froze again?
Oh man. Well, Trump specifically on Twitter multiple times pushed for people to take hydroxychloroquine, multiple times, and people died as a result of that. Because of his medical negligence, people died. So conservatives lied about fake treatments. They lied about the efficacy of the actual vaccines that were produced. The efficacy of the vaccines when they first came out were well over 90%. I think in the case of the Moderna vaccine, it was like over 95% efficacy, something like that. They lied about the whole like, young people get myocarditis from the vaccines. That was one single cohort of people, and the odds of getting myocarditis from the vaccine within that cohort are lower than the odds of getting myocarditis from COVID-19.
Yeah.
It's insanity. So they lied about that. They lied about the efficacy of masks. Masks work. Even cloth masks, actually, believe it or not, there were studies done that showed, obviously not as good as your like N95 masks, but they still are more effective than nothing at preventing your droplets from being transmitted from one person to another. They lied about social distancing, which is just crazy because, like, I don't know how anyone argues that, like, if you put distance between two people, like, you're less likely to spit on them. I don't even know how you even argue about, I guess, but whatever. I remember conservatives saying social distancing doesn't work, but whatever. Like, every aspect of it, conservatives lied day in and day out. Every single aspect.
Yeah, it's actually the conversation that I have had on Peaceful Science. Like, the forum, right? Because I had this conversation between, like, somebody else was like complaining about the miscommunication from like the CDC and FDA, and some in certain aspects there were miscommunications. Like one example is like there was like a people pushed for the fact that vaccines made you immune. But of course, the reality is that you can still get sick, but the whole point is that you are less sick. The severity of the illness becomes less severe if you take the vaccine. But then, of course, that wasn't very clearly communicated. But then I also but I also pointed out to the same person that, to me, the bigger problem is you have a whole avalanche of nonsense coming from people like Trump and RFK Jr. and Elon Musk even. Like, I think Elon Musk also promoted hydroxychloroquine as well.
I don't remember hydroxychloroquine specifically, but I do remember that he posted about the COVID-19 vaccine causing myocarditis. I do remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll take the word for it because I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, but see, so not only like miscommunications from health experts is an issue.
Yes, absolutely.
It is. And a bigger issue is you have just people pushing for nonsense, and the public doesn't know who to trust. Like, sometimes they will just pick for, like, I'm a Trump supporter and I will just believe whatever Trump says.
Yep.
That is also a big problem. Yeah.
Oh, and on top of all that, uh, the best evidence from our intelligence agencies and from the biological community still implicates bats as being as having the progenitor of SARS-CoV-2. There is still no good evidence. There's no evidence at all that it was leaked from the Wuhan virology lab. There isn't any.
And the only plausible leak scenario I can think of is you have scientists like going out in nature, getting a sample, taking the sample back to the lab, and then it leaked out. That's the only plausible way, because like if you want to argue that the genome was artificially manipulated, there is like evidence against that, because we have the genome. We have the genome of the virus. There's no way you cannot hide the genome, because every scientist, like all over the world, there are facilities who can genome or sequence the genome of the virus. So there's no way a conspiracy can hide the genome from you. So, and we can see that in the genome there is no sign of any genetic alterations there.
Right. Whether you look at the spike protein, whether you
Yeah.
look at the actual like the binding site, whether you look at the cleavage site, the furin cleavage site. Regardless of what you look at, none of these show any evidence at all of human manipulation. None of them. And I do want to get to Andrew Cummings said, didn't the CIA say at one point, say otherwise at one point, albeit with low confidence? Yes, they did. I'll explain that in 1 second. So Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, former director of national intelligence, did a report. So commissioned we looked at who was working in the Wuhan lab at the time that COVID, at the time of the outbreak, at the time before. Nobody who worked in the lab got COVID. We know this for a fact. Our national intelligence knows for a fact nobody working at the Wuhan lab got COVID when COVID outbroke. No one did. None of the viruses they were working with at the Wuhan lab could plausibly have been the ancestor of COVID. None of them. We know this for a fact. We know that the pangolin Sarbeca viruses were not the ancestor also. They were close cousins. So we still don't know precisely how it jumped from bat to us. So there was some intermediate that we just don't know what it was as of present. But it didn't go through the lab. We do know that. Okay. So we know that none of the aspects of the viral genome were tampered with. There's no evidence that they were messing with anything like it at the Wuhan lab. So why did the CIA change its mind all of a sudden? Okay. That is a good question. The answer is the head of the CIA was appointed by Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The head of the CIA is a guy who believed in the lab leak hypothesis before he became the head of the CIA, and he simply changed the CIA's position on it. That's all he did.
Yeah.
To date,
Also, I find
the CIA
it very
has provided
ironic.
no new evidence.
I also find it very ironic that conspiracy theories cite the CIA in support of their conspiracy. Like,
Yeah,
but normally you would expect that the CIA is basically a secretive government agency that hides
right. Well, I mean,
like
it's you cite this. They cite the CIA because it agrees with them. I'm sure
that's their point. Like, if the CIA disagreed, then that would also be taken as evidence for the conspiracy. Like, oh, of course they would disagree. That's like
if the
themselves
CIA
you lose.
says that it was Al Qaeda terrorists who flew planes into the Twin Towers, well, of course they're going to say that. That's the media narrative. But if they agree with us, oh well, that's evidence that we're correct. Like it's either way, it's the all roads lead to Rome sort of thing. All answers lead to the correct answer. So, so yeah. But yes, basically the CIA agent or the CIA, the head, basically just changed he changed the group's position on it merely because he already believed that. And to date, there has been no new evidence that they've presented that I've seen in favor of it. So if they have evidence, okay. If they have evidence that the virus went through the Wuhan lab at some point or another, somehow, some way, okay, fine. Show it. Where is it? Where's the evidence? Bring it. That's fine. Like I don't intrinsically have a problem with the idea of the virus going through the Wuhan lab and then spreading. Like I don't have a problem with that. If it happened, it
like,
happened.
as long, like as I said before, as long, like unless you want to argue that it was an artificial virus, like there's no evidence against the fact that it is not artificial, but it can still be the case that it went through the lab as a like scientist going out to nature, taking the sample back to the lab, and then that is plausible, but still, we still have no evidence that is the case at this point.
It's just we just don't have evidence in favor of that currently. If the evidence comes about, okay, then we'll change our minds. We'll update our position accordingly. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just it's just what it is. Okay, all right, we can get back to the video.
Jackson, sometimes I like to make fun of the host as the producer. Did you know that we are now more minutes into the show than we are seconds into the video?
I could believe that, yes.
Yes, we're 47 seconds in and almost an hour into the show.
So yeah.
Well, I mean, people don't know this, but Jackson, before the show, asked, what are we going to do after this video? And I said, we're not getting through this in one show.
Well, it was more just, I think we had talked about, I think I'd asked for some, like, anti-climate change videos, I think. Didn't we have some?
I did send you a few examples that I could find, but...
Yeah. Nestle did submit a few videos, but this is the only one that I got from you as a definite.
Oh, well, I mean, we can do the ones that Nestle sent also. We can do those.
Well, we can't because I don't have those lined up in.
No, I'm saying whenever we finish this video, later when we finish this video.
Much later.
Yes, correct. Much later. Yes.
Sorry.
Ivan Aransky, welcome to Heterodox Out Loud.
Great to be here.
So you're a journalist, a medical journalist. Our listeners may know you as the co-founder of Retraction Watch. Tell us a bit about Retraction Watch.
Sure. So Retraction Watch is a site, a blog. Actually, it's how it started in 2010 with my good friend and colleague Adam Marcus, about scientific fraud, obviously about retractions, which are often due to scientific fraud. And we're a journalism site that covers pretty much every day, sometimes more than once a day, a case or a story or something going on, whether it's in scientific publishing, some things going usually badly, but sometimes well in scientific publishing, again, fraud, retractions, and some other larger issues. We also have a database of retractions, the most comprehensive database of retractions that is now public and anyone can take a look at.
Yeah, it's an amazing asset. That's
pause
a huge,
for a second, please, Peter. So just to remind everyone that, like, papers being retracted is a good thing because it means science is working. That I have no idea if, I don't know if they're going to say this or this is, something they believe, but I've heard it used before, not by them necessarily, that, like, oh, scientific paper got retracted, that means that science is bad. Well, no, if the paper got retracted, that means science worked. That means scientists did peer review and the paper's bad methodology or whatever was exposed. That's the whole point of science. That's literally the whole point.
Yeah, it's when like a peer review before publishing is basically okay. We are taking the like this is like a big misconception. Like people think that pre-publication peer review is supposed to like look for fraud, but most of the case it's not all that's happening. They are just looking at if the arguments and the reasoning within the paper is like coherent at least.
Is it
Like,
sound? Yeah.
Is the reasoning sound? Does the data present that support the conclusion? Yes, all right. So then we publish this. But then later, other scientists look at their work and they say like, oh wait, there's a problem with here, and then it may get retracted when other scientists go and see the paper for themselves like that. So it's like peer review doesn't begin and end with pre-publication. That's not how it works.
Yes. I want to give an example of something that I think is really. I want to give an example of. Hold on, give me 1 second. I'm sorry, I have to find it. I have to search one of my documents for it. I wrote about this the other day. I want to cite 2 papers that I think are really important in this regard. So one paper is titled "Scientific Progress Despite Irreproducibility: A Seeming Paradox," paper by Richard Schifrin et al. I'll put here in our little chat. And then another paper titled "Crisis or Self-Correction: Rethinking Media Narratives About the Well-Being of Science" by Kathleen Hall Jameson. Now, those are both really good and interesting papers because the first paper talks about the so-called replication crisis, which, by the way, really only exists in like psychology and like medical sciences. But this replication crisis is basically the idea that lots of papers are getting recalled, and that's a problem for the field itself because results can't get reproduced. Now, the paper points out that even though there are examples in which papers are getting recalled, there's still a lot of progress in both the fields of medicine and psychology. So, for instance, the paper gives a specific example of within oncology. I mean, it also gives specific examples within psychology, but within oncology, so cancer research.
Oh yeah, that's a big
researchers are still making enormous strides with cancer research. For instance, CRISPR-Cas. Just a few years ago, a girl with incurable leukemia was cured using CRISPR-Cas. Right? That is a boundary-pushing research right there. Likewise, using there's a new burgeoning field of fighting cancer, which is immunotherapy, which basically involves targeting your cancer cells with little tags, essentially, and your immune cells can then go after the cancer and target it themselves. That's great. That's awesome. It's really cool. We can do that sort of stuff. And the paper goes into that sort of thing. And it says like, hey, there's all this really important stuff. There's all these really important advancements and breakthroughs in cancer research, despite the fact that there's a seeming, replication crisis. And really, we should have talked about the replication crisis in the War on Science. I'm kicking myself now for not remembering that. But, oh well, what can you do? We'll talk about it some other point, I guess. Professor Dave actually did a really good video on it recently because he's been sparring with Sabina Hossenfelder, who has basically just kind of become
a grifter. Yeah,
a grifter. Yeah, I was trying to think of a different word. Yeah, she's a grifter.
She is just maybe she's not doing it like consciously. Maybe she's possessed by how do you call it again? Somebody's demon. Morton's demon, or how do I forgot the specific name.
What is it?
Like I remember a scientist describing a person who is possessed by a demon when they are picking and choosing what they believe. Like basically confirmation, a different name for confirmation bias. I
Okay.
forget
I
the name.
gotcha.
But in any case, I think Sabina also felt is just seeing a pattern with which videos are more successful on YouTube, and then she's like, oh, okay, I keep my tone that seems to attract more views, and that's basically it. Yeah.
And I'm very glad that Professor Dave is going after her because she sucks. What she's been doing is extremely harmful to science and science communication, which is what we do on this channel. So it really sucks that she's out there dumping on science communication and the process of science generally, largely because her pet theory, pet hypothesis about physics turned out to be true and didn't get her funding, I guess. And so she's mad about that and is taking it out on all of physics. Not extremely dissimilar from the Weinsteins, by the way, or Weinsteins. They're also idiots. So anyway, so she is taking the replication crisis stuff and she's saying that that's a problem for science generally. I don't think it is. Also, the other paper, Crisis or Self-Replication, Rethinking Media and Narratives About the Well-Being of Science, that one is a paper analyzing how the media portrays like actual fraud in science and trying to show that in instances of actual fraud in science, the reason the fraud was exposed was science, the self-correcting mechanisms of science. So saying that, oh, there's fraud, like that doesn't really harm science itself because science is the one that found it. It's the same thing that happened with the like Piltdown Man, for instance, right? This was a hoax that was perpetrated on the scientific community, but the actual knowledge of evolution that researchers got from studying actual human fossils helped show that Piltdown Man was bogus. And it's also why creationists like accepted or continue to accept like actual fake artifacts, like the Accombro figures, the Ica stones, the Burdick print, things like this. So anyway, we keep going.
It's just still common for people to accept these things, but then on the science side, like scientists tend to be very quick when like once a fraud has been exposed, they're like, oh yeah, all right, let's move on. But not so much on the anti-science side. They like many still cling on to these frauds.
Okay, we can keep going.
Yeah,
a huge visiting place for our Heterodox Academy members. You were an undergrad at Harvard. You did your MD at New York's NYU School of Medicine.
Correct. Yep.
And I heard that at Harvard you were also involved in the Crimson.
Yeah, I spent probably, and now I can admit this, the statute of limitations is ended, John, but I spent at least as much and probably more time at the Crimson, where we used to come out and print 6 nights a week or 6 mornings a week. And I loved it. And that's where I learned how to be a journalist. But I was also pre-med and, of course, ended up going to medical school as well.
Let's begin. On January 20th, President Trump passed an executive order which stated that the government recognizes 2 genders, male and female. I was reading last night that a poll that said that issue that executive order is President Trump's most popular issue. It's the item on which the strongest majority of people approve of him. So,
is it not the dumbest thing you've ever heard? Also, like, who cares? This is first of all, of course, obviously, this is an instance of people not knowing the difference between sex and gender, and also the fact that there are, like, just objectively within science, it is acknowledged within biology that gender is not easily broken down into a binary. This is acknowledged within like behavioral biology, neuroendocrinology. They accept this. I was literally just looking at a paper like a couple days ago that was talking about how a simple binary does not capture the range of differences in human biology and behavior. So, like, I don't understand why this is a hard thing. I personally, I thought we'd already kind of gotten past this. I thought
Oh,
as a
no.
society
Oh,
we'd
no.
already like accepted that gender and sex are two different things, but now we're like back, I guess.
No,
don't know.
it will only it will only get dropped when they find a new target to focus on.
Right.
And I think the next target will be gay marriage. That's the next target.
Oh, almost certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something I've been reading about recently. Of course, the percentage of actual like trans people in the U.S. is like less than 1%. And then the percentage of trans people in the NCAA is 0.0008%. That's 3 zeros. Because there are approximately 40 trans athletes out of over 500,000 total athletes within the NCAA. So the saving like women's sports nonsense is just bigotry. That's all it is. There's nothing else to it. It is just bigotry.
Yeah, this is also something that if you're not finished, sorry,
No,
I don't
no, go ahead.
interrupt you. All right.
No, go. You're good.
It's just like I don't know why. Like I start to talk and then for a split second I'm like, oh, did I interrupt you?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I don't mean to. I don't mean to.
You're fine. Feel free to just jump in. Feel free. I talk most of this, so go ahead.
This is also something that they reactionaries want to do. Like they take a previously marginalized group and then they use that as a shield to go after a new marginalized group. Like before they like, oh, we want to protect the gay people from the Muslims, and now they are like, oh, we want to protect the women from the trans women.
Right.
Yeah, that's the whole point of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's there's that stupid account on Twitter that's like gays against groomers or something like that. That is I'd highly doubt the person running that account is gay. Almost certainly it's just a straight person. But anyway, it is silly. Like I think it was Utah passed a bill banning trans people from participating in high school sports. That bill targeted only one student. Can you imagine your tax dollars going to an administration that targets a single student out of hundreds of thousands? I mean, I guess you don't really have to imagine now, it's been done, but I just find that to be such an absurd waste of money when we're talking about government efficiency, and we have politicians who are crying about these people who make up less than 1% of the population. It's so absurd. There are so many bigger issues to worry about, like homeless people. For God's sake,
that's actually the whole point. It's just at least two goals. Like the one I mentioned before, authoritarians target marginalized groups to lay the groundwork for continuing to erode the rights of the population. Like it's always where it starts. Like again, Godwin's law. Sorry about that. But even the 1940s German party also at first targeted trans people. If I'm right, yes, they also
gays, trans.
That was the first. Yeah, that was the first target. But also another goal is to. I forgot the second goal. What did you mention before I started talking?
Trans people in sports, gay people. Restricting the rights of minorities.
I forgot the point that I was making. Sorry.
Were you going to talk about using the group that they used as a shield to attack the other group, then taking their rights away?
Yeah, there's also a point. Yeah.
I think
I had a different point in mind, but I forgot to talk. I forgot the point. Sorry.
I think it's okay. Also needs to be counted in that they're catering to their fan base, which are evangelicals.
Yes. Yeah.
So
But I remember the point that I was thinking. The another point is that this is a pure distraction of the real
Yes.
issues that harm you. Like
obviously,
it's the reason why you are suffering is not because you're like the elite class are suppressing your wage, so you cannot earn a living. The real problem is the immigrants taking your job.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Mhm.
whole point of distracting you with this nonsense. So you stay angry at the wrong people. You're not angry at the actual people who are screwing you over.
Yeah. Oh, Alex Markle points out, considering states literally bust homeless people to California to make themselves look better, California's handling the situation pretty well. A similar thing happened. I don't know if you guys remember with Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott flying immigrants to Martha's Vineyard and trying to be like, haha, why don't you take the immigrants? And they just did. I was really sad that charges never came out of that because it kind of seemed like that was just like human trafficking, like literally human trafficking. But apparently it just didn't matter. And of course, now nothing's going to happen because it's Trump in charge. But I was really hoping something was going to come out of that. Like that seems like it's human trafficking. Anyway. Okay, we can keep going.
Yep,
Oh,
you
wait,
have it.
never mind. My Unfinished Journey for $6.66. Hail Nero, hail Jax, Ness, and Peter. May reality reign once again. Here is hoping. Thank you.
Let's hope so.
Far, in part, I think because it's seen to be part of a fight against transgender ideology that many people have been talking about.
That
But
no
I
one cares
also
about.
understand that President Trump's executive order has caused disruption in research. And we're going to talk about that disruption together. That'll be our main topic today. I just wonder if we can just start just in a word. How serious is the disruption caused by research, caused to research by this executive order? Just briefly, we'll come back to it, but just start us off with a teaser, if you would.
Yeah, I would say two things quickly. One is that it has caused a lot of people very quickly to scramble to sort of scrub their papers. In fact, and part of, I don't know if it was exactly part of the executive order, but it was part of a related sort of suite of orders and sort of rulings, if you will, that researchers who use certain language, including language that you would use to describe, trans people identified as trans and what have you like that, had to withdraw any manuscripts that were under consideration.
Pause for a
And
moment.
that,
like you know Jordan Peterson, right, Jackson?
I wish I didn't, but yes, unfortunately.
But he would say, like, if you come up to him and he would say, like, I think it's just basic human decency to respect someone's pronouns. Like if you say, like, oh, I like to be called he, him, or they, them, doesn't matter. Just if you want that, I will respect your choice. But Peterson would say, oh, that's forced speech. That's forced speech.
Yeah.
But I wonder, how did he react to something like this, where, like, just from the executive branch?
That's like you're buzzing again.
Oh, sorry.
And I'll juggle until Nestle comes back.
Am I still buzzing?
No, keep going.
All right. So, but I wonder how Jordan Peterson reacted to this.
Oh, we know how he reacted. He said, "Oh, thank goodness that the gender ideology madness has finally been defeated by Lord Donald Trump."
Yeah.
Yeah. What you have to remember is Peterson.
Every accusation is a confession.
Yes, Peterson and Gadsad both got famous. Not so much Gadsad, but he was kind of on Peterson's coattails there because of the controversy that they generated around Bill, was it C-16, I think, the Canadian bill.
Yeah, that's the bill C-16. Yes.
The bill only applied to federal workers. So the bill stated that federal workers have to correctly gender people. But what Peterson lied about incessantly, and Gadsad did the same thing, they lied that the bill applied to everyone, that it forced everyone across the board to respect people's pronouns, which it doesn't. But regardless, it's so easy to respect people's pronouns. It's not hard at all. Having dated a transgender person myself, it's not hard. It is really easy. I work with trans people. It's not at all difficult. You just ask them once, like, what do you prefer? And they tell you, and then you just remember that because it's easy to remember. I genuinely,
yeah.
I don't understand.
If you tell them, just try to not be a dick. Just try to not be a dick to other people. Be nice. That is already too much. That is already too much. It's already a big encroachment on their freedom of speech, apparently. Just wow, yeah.
Yes. Triceratops points out, if I have to call you Ted instead of Raphael, you can use my pronouns. Yeah, 100%. Yes, Ted Cruz's name is actually Raphael, but he goes by a preferred name, which is Ted. It's so silly. It's all so ridiculous. Everything that they do is just nonsense. It's either distraction or it's hypocrisy. There's no reason.
But this is also a like it's not like it sounds crazy again, yes, but I think it's also a deliberate point, because when you dress yourself up as a defender of free speech and a defender of gender facts or something like that, like or biology, defender of biological science, then you give yourself the permission to do stuff like this, to like, by executive order, we defend biology, and then you get stuff like this. Yeah, that's the whole point of it.
I was writing. I was thinking about this a lot this past week because I was writing a section in Rocks Were There Volume 2. RJ and I we're working on it. We're getting there, folks. I promise. And in this section, I was writing about the difference between endothermy and exothermy, especially as it regards to dinosaurs. And the thing I kept having to think about while I was writing this section was it's really difficult to define what exactly endothermy versus ectothermy is, because it's not a binary, it's a range. There are lots of different vertebrates that like span the gap or span the gap at different times of the year, for instance. So like tegu lizards can actually be more warm-blooded during the reproductive season and more cold-blooded the rest of the year. There are gigantotherms like sea turtles, like the leatherback sea turtle, which is traditionally ectothermic, like other sea turtles, but as they became bigger and bigger, the amount of body fat that they have actually insulates them, and they became endothermic independently. Some sharks, some stingrays, some large fish also have basically independently developed endothermy by focusing how much of certain metabolic processes they do in certain parts of their body. And so they actually heat up their body by doing more of these metabolic processes in certain parts than others. And so what it made me think about was like, when you're in school, when you're in high school, for instance, you're taught in biology, like, vertebrates are either warm-blooded or they're cold-blooded, right? You have your warm-blooded mammals and birds, your cold-blooded reptiles and amphibians and fish. But that's just not true. That just simply is not an accurate statement, accurate descriptor of these different groups of organisms. Mammals, as a whole, are warm-blooded, but platypuses and echidnas are less warm-blooded than placental and eutherian mammals are, or eutherian, sorry, than placental and eutherian mammals are. Placental and marsupial mammals. I'm so sorry. I meant to say marsupial. I kept saying eutherian. I meant to say marsupial and eutherian. Eutherian, i.e. placental. I kept saying the wrong thing. My apologies, folks. So monotremes are less endothermic than those other groups are.
Mm-hmm.
Birds are also endothermic, but they came from ectotherms ultimately via dinosaurs that were probably mesothermic. So dinosaurs were kind of in between. And there's a bit of a debate as to whether, like, were theropods like always endothermic? Did they become endothermic later on? Were they more ectothermic or more mesothermic, I guess? And then birds became endotherms after, like, Archaeopteryx. There's a big debate over that, actually. And so there's all this debate over, like, whether or not to call, like, do we call tuna endotherms? Do we call the great white an endotherm? There's all these questions about it because it's complicated. It varies. It's not that simple. And so, anyway,
Yeah. I think I have seen like Andrew Cumming also makes a good point that these people don't actually care about biology.
sure,
No.
sure.
Yeah, like if you went up to Donald Trump or like what's his face again, Matt. How do
JD Vance?
No, I forget the
Elon Musk?
No, he calls himself the theocratic fascist on Twitter.
Oh, Matt Walsh. Yes.
Yeah, Matt Walsh. Yes.
If I went up to him, I don't think it would be words that were exchanged.
But he would probably say something like, "Oh, you're making this too complicated," which already tells you that they don't care about biology because biology is complicated. What they care about what they care about is that they, like, again, every accusation is a confession. So when they accuse others of like pushing a gender ideology, but that's exactly what they are doing. They are pushing their own gender ideology, but they are calling it something else.
His stupid definition that a woman is an adult human female is every bit as definitionally problematic as saying, like, oh, a woman is a person who identifies as a woman. Like, it's every bit as definitionally problematic. For instance, when you say adult to whom? Adult in the West? In the West, that's like, somewhere between 17 and 20, somewhere around there. Or maybe even 16 to 20, something like that. If you go to, like, Tasmania, or the Australian Aboriginals, to them, a woman is someone who has achieved menarche.
Well, so if you were to ask Matt Walsh, he would say 14 is a good age for marriage.
That's probably true. But still, I mean, like, that's the point, right? It's cultural. There's no such thing as, like, there's a biological point at which women achieve, or girls achieve puberty, become women, but, like, that varies. It varies by culture. It varies. Like, not every girl is the same. Some girls are going to have it later in life, more like 13. Some are going to have it more like, there's precocious puberty when you have it more like 10. So it varies. It's not a simple, it's this or that. It's a range. Again, it's non-binary. In fact, some might say.
Yeah. But if they were honest, if they were completely open, that they would say that they are pushing for like a very sometimes they are saying that, like, they are pushing for a very traditional view of what a man and what a woman should be.
Mm-hmm.
They like on the surface they are saying, like, oh no, we are defending like objective biological facts. Like they want to come across as being descriptive, but what they are doing is they are being normative. They want to establish a norm, which is
right.
Women should be at home cooking dinner and taking care of the kids at home, and men should go out to work. Like, it's basically that.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, the same is true of, like, when they say female. When you say female, you are bringing a lot of baggage with you. You're bringing baggage about someone's reproductive organs, about someone's chromosomes, about someone's their genes. Like, you're bringing a whole bunch of baggage in about this person that you don't know. You can't tell just by looking at them. And so you have to ask, or their ability to produce gametes, right? And so when you ask questions I don't do it anymore because there's no point. I don't argue with people on Twitter anymore. But when I used to do that sort of thing, I'd ask like, okay, is a woman defined by their ability to produce large immobile gametes? Yes, of course, women produce ova. Okay, so a person who does not produce gametes at all is not a woman, therefore, or could not be a woman. Well, that doesn't matter. Like, this is also, and Nestle, tell me if I'm wrong. This is the only area I've ever seen in like any field where when you bring up an exception, they say it doesn't matter. I have never seen that in any other field ever.
It's again, it's not like they don't care about gametes. Gametes are just like what they are thinking is women like the way I describe it is like they have a mold, like a shape that they adhere to, and any you have like a women mold and a man mold. So any woman must fit in the woman mold, and any man must fit in the man mold. And if you don't, then you're not a real woman. But then it's a normative view. They want to come across as being objective about like I just care about biological facts. I don't describe to an ideology, but that's exactly what they are. They are being ideological. That's all it is.
Right.
And the gametes is just an excuse that they can find.
Or if you say like, okay, well, this person has XY chromosomes, but she is presented as a female her entire life. She has normal genitalia, and she has a daughter, which is a thing that happened, by the way. What does that mean? Does that mean that she's therefore not a woman because she has XY chromosomes?
If they are completely honest and self-aware, they would respond like this: "Oh, that doesn't matter. My ideology still stands."
Sure. Right.
If they are self-conscious about it, like they want to be objective. They want to fall back to nature, basically. Like, oh, I'm just being objective, what nature is. But then they no, they are actually being ideological, and they don't want to admit that they are being ideological about their beliefs.
And like, if even if they were like willing to say like, okay, in most cases, like this is how we're defining women or men or whatever, like at least that would be being a bit more honest. But they don't want to even do that because they don't want to. It's kind of like it's kind of like I don't know what, like Jesus mythicist or something. Like it's like we can't give any ground whatsoever to the enemy. Otherwise, we're like they're gonna win. Like no, God still isn't real. Just even though Jesus was a real person, like this is irrelevant. And it's the same way I feel about the argument about trans people is they can't give any ground at all, or else they're like, oh, the trans ideology is one. Which there's no such thing as trans ideology. That's not a thing. It's a scare tactic. It doesn't mean anything. It's all nonsense. Okay, all right, we can keep going.
That, to me, at a high level, means that inquiry is being quashed or at least limited. And then the anticipatory obedience of what people are doing, even if it's not related directly to that, I think that's a big problem. I think, though, that, just to put this in perspective a little bit, again, briefly, is that this is part, the EO, the executive order, was part of a suite of what a lot of people are seeing as an attack on science, an attack on whether you want to call it an attack on inquiry or just an attack on research and researchers and their budgets and their work, that even if all of it gets rolled back, which seems unlikely, but even if all of it were get rolled back, whether it's court order or they roll it back because it is no longer the most popular part of what he's doing, et cetera, it's causing such consternation and such, honestly, existential dread among scientists that they are leaving the field or deciding not to do something. That, to me, hard to measure, but pernicious and probably a bigger problem.
We're going to loop back to that issue.
100%, absolutely.
It's a fascinating topic. I want to, before we move to that, I want to now to go backwards in time a little bit and frame some of these issues about the relationship of government funding to science for our listeners, so when we do that particular, we approach this particular question, we can have that background. And
Mhm.
as I understand, um, the movement of government funding into research at universities is a relatively new phenomenon. In the
Sure.
1940s, for example, my understanding is that most universities were reluctant to take funding from government on the research side because they wanted to have their own independence. I think
Mhm.
academic freedom in those days was thought to be perhaps threatened by new funding sources from government, perhaps presciently, but it's a complicated issue as we'll be finding out. Can you just say a little bit about that? I mean, my understanding was that, and Vannevar Bush, I think, is really an important figure that you and I were talking about before we came on the show in this process. So, how did government start funding research in science, and what were some of the issues when that happened?
Yeah, so I'm going to, for 30 seconds, take us even further back and just sort of set the
Please,
stage a little
please.
bit.
I love going back further. Stepping back is my favorite thing to do. So step
Me
back.
too,
It's
just not,
off the
off a
cliff.
cliff. Exactly. Just, I'm glad we both went there. Maybe I'm disturbed we both went there. I think, because, and the reason I want to do this is a couple trend lines. Like, one trend line is how much money it actually costs to do research. And, we can talk about, and I think we will talk about, that there's fraud and there's various things, problems in that, inherent in any human endeavor. However, there's really no denying that it has become much, much, much more expensive to do research today than it was
Yeah.
in, the 1940s when we're talking about Vannevar Bush, and I want to get back to that in a second. But let's go back 400 years or even 500 years. It cost, I don't want to say nothing, but like relatively nothing to do fundamental work. How much,
Right.
investment did Isaac Newton need? Now, he needed some, but there were sort of patricians who could support basically what we needed. I'm oversimplifying here and probably maybe
Yeah.
even unfairly, but there's no question that the cost of research, it's buying lab equipment, it's buying reagents, it's like buying mice that,
Oh,
that
pause for a second.
transgenic mice that
So I saw on Twitter, this has been a while back now, but it was a post that made me kind of, it made me angry because Twitter always does that. It was some idiot who basically posted some like polymath from the 16th century and said, why aren't there men like this anymore? And the answer is we know a lot more stuff than he did. It's really easy, or it was really easy, to be a polymath in the 16th century because we didn't know crap about anything. We didn't know um, how our bodies worked. We didn't know like how many species were on Earth. We didn't know where volcanoes came from or why it rained or whatever the frick. We didn't know any of these things. We had no idea how any of these processes worked. And so to point at someone from that time period and be like, wow, these guys, they had it going on. Like, it's just idiotic. And that post really made me mad. And I was looking at that guy's other posts, and he was like an AI bro and all this other sort of nonsense. But it's he's right. He's absolutely correct. It's expensive to do things because we've done all the easy stuff already. We've picked all the low hanging fruit. Sucks, but we've done it. If you if you want to do like if you want to find something new, it's going to cost money, or it's going to cost. You have to like use equipment or use mice or some other organism. That's not cheap. You have to go to a university to do that. It's hard. It's not impossible, but it's a lot harder to do like just citizen science, than it used to be. If you want to do citizen science, usually there's like an expert who's running that group, right? If it's like an archaeologist, you know, setting out like squares for people to look in like a forest or something, or paleontologist or what have you. But like you're right, it's expensive, yeah. So all right, we can keep going.
are, bred to sort of have a certain disease or not have it. Things like that are, or building telescopes, right? You spend as much building a world-class telescope on top of a mountain now as maybe the entire budget of whatever year in the 1900s. So the reason I want to just push on that a
Yeah,
little
why,
bit is
why
that
didn't the
the money
polymaths
has to
make
come from
the James Webb Space Telescope?
Right. Right, exactly.
somewhere if you want science. Now, if we as a society or as a government, or hopefully a government that is reflecting the will of society at least, decide we don't need that and they can go do it however they want, that's a decision. It's one I vehemently disagree with. I think that science and research, when done well, which a lot of it is the best way, maybe the only good way to understand the world better. And therefore,
Yeah.
whether you want to talk about applied knowledge and coming up with new, vaccines and drugs, or just knowing how stuff works, which is pretty damn important and
Mhm.
fascinating. Like, there's no other way to do it other than to have funds for it. So if we
Mhm.
can't, and there may be people who disagree with me on that and say not so much that it wouldn't cost money, but we shouldn't prioritize that. I respect that. Again, disagree with it. But if you therefore then sort of track that historically against the trend line of government involvement in funding, right? It tracks, because what was happening in the 1940s, right? It was a bit pre-Sputnik, right? So obviously, but it was
Manhattan Project
Manhattan
happening.
Project, exactly. There were
Mhm.
needs that scientists, or at least that people
Oh,
felt
pause for a
scientists, and I would
second.
agree.
Government funding, even if not in science, in basic science per se, government funding has always been essential to the economy. By the way, there's this idea again among, here I go talking about my they just have lots of hobbies. That's true. That is true. Oh God, Terrence Howard. I was thinking Noam Chomsky. He seems to be a bit polymathic to me. Um, um, oh shoot, it's true. Oh, sorry. Yes. So government has always had to put big investment into the economy for us to grow as a society. Machining, the practice of using machines to make things, is largely um, an American invention. Now, we got the idea of it from the French, but we took that idea and we built upon it heavily. And so that idea that's can be called American manufacturing. That was developed by the Army, which is publicly funded, is federally funded. The government cleared the West, for better or worse. Got rid of those pesky Native Americans who were living there, minding their own business. The governments of the National Association of Manufacturers petitioned the government for tariffs in the late 1800s to protect fledgling industries, which we don't need anymore. The tariffs are bad for the economy now because the industries are not fledgling anymore, but that's another conversation. Also, for the U.S. government to take over the Panama Canal in the early 1900s. If you look at like economies that grew out of like totalitarian societies, so like we saved South Korea, right? I remember Reagan, or I remember reading that like Reagan was like, oh, they have a good strong. I can't do a Reagan accent. They have good strong capitalist economy, and it's true they do have a strong economy, but it's because of government input into their economy through. I can't. Oh, hold on a second. I'm drawing a blank. I need to remember what specific. Hold on. I need to find this. There's a specific company that. What company was that? Hold on. Let me find this so I can make my point. So I can have a specific. Was it Korea? I'm pretty sure it was Korea. No, wasn't this? Wasn't this? Samsung. Yes, here we go. Yes. Here's a quote from The Big Myth by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway. Reagan offered Japan and South Korea as classic examples of nations rising from the ashes of war to set standards of economic prosperity that dazzle the world. Americans should let go of protectionist impulses and recognize Japanese and Korean efficiency for what it is, because that's what the magic of the marketplace is all about. This was just plain wrong. Japanese and Korean companies may have been efficient, but their successes were heavily government-led. Samsung, the most successful Korean company selling to Americans, had risen to prominence on the back of tax breaks, preferential bank loans, export credits, and other forms of government favoritism. Koreans even had a name for the large conglomerates like Samsung that had prospered from their strong ties with the government agencies. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this. Chaebol, Chaebol. A chaebol is literally a rich clan, sometimes also translated as a wealth clique or money clan. The pattern of Asian development that Reagan loved to tout did not support his claims. So I just wanted to throw that example in there. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, we can keep going.
Were uniquely positioned to fill. So therefore, to fulfill. So therefore, you had a need for funding. Now you had a need for structure, you had a need for all sorts of things, but you had a need for a workforce. And so it was not purely a competitive play at that time. It became one, right? So, you could have started the NIH or, sort of created what is now the NIH in the 1940s, and then nothing else really happened. Then it kind of went along. Well, now it's, you could argue, a behemoth. It's looking at give or take a $50 billion budget. And so one of the things that happened there was that not only did they say, well, we should fund, research grants, we should fund specific research, we should also fund what are known now as indirect costs, right? Overhead costs. The costs of, heating a building at a university, or of hiring administrative staff, or doing things that you need in order to actually manage this process, which is the sort of unsung heroes in many ways of what goes on. Over time, so Bush himself actually sort of, he was, I wouldn't put sort of emotions in his head, but he was actually a bit frustrated, maybe surprised that universities at that time said, well, we don't really want that. Like, they were more open to the idea of funding, but the sort of indirect costs, like, we don't want our sort of core needs to be funded by government, because then the government will have too much control over it, which I think is fascinating, because that is an argument you hear a lot from, I would argue, the right.
Yes, of course.
You don't hear it much from the left.
It's most famous with Hillsdale College, who refused to take federal funding so that they could have autonomy in a whole variety of ways.
And you also see people say, well, the reason
that's an
why
interesting
climate
point.
change research sort of always seems to point in a particular direction is because of the need to seek funding from agencies like EPA or from, NSF, and also NOAA, that sort of go a certain way, if you will. And I think, or at least have, and I think, but if you sort of couple that with, well, not couple it with, but if you then go through history again a little bit, I'll just do this somewhat briefly. Over time, that notion of indirect costs, which are being directly attacked right now by the Trump administration, this notion of indirect costs has swung pendulum-wise over time. Sometimes probably for good reason, other times in reaction to something bad that happened. So, for example, scandal in the really sort of late 80s, early 90s about it being, some of these funds being misused and sort of used on what they really shouldn't have been, or at least people didn't think they should be.
For example, the yacht.
For example, a yacht at Stanford University, so that they could attract big donors who also like yachts, right?
And
I like yachts.
Hey, I think that's a great use of funds.
And I was telling you
about?
before we came on that I was teaching at Stanford at the time when that whole scandal was breaking, and it was front page news in the in the local papers.
So things swung back, and then again, as you might expect, Congress and what have you said, well, that's terrible. We've got to pull these things back. They then crept back up, and then there were some other times when they also again shrunk. It's sort of a cycle, and then a couple of years ago, and this is what people are pointing out as this sort of as these Trump comments and sort of orders start to come out, is that Congress, I think, probably in anticipation of what might happen, essentially enshrined a certain overall rate of indirect costs, but also more importantly said it's an act of it requires an act of Congress to change that.
Correct.
You can't just do that. Next president, whoever you might be, well, guess what? He's trying to do that. Again, all of this as by way of saying funding for research, I would argue, is critical. And the problem is that if you say, well, we're not going to fund it, the government shouldn't fund it, or it should fund it less, someone else is probably going to come in and sweep in and actually replace that. And in the case of clinical medicine and clinical research, that's almost exclusively industry. So
there you go, Nestle.
It's a bit of careful what you wish for, or harm reduction, if you want to think of it. In other words, there are a lot of people who object strenuously to industry funding research, and yet they're the only ones who can afford to do it in clinical trials.
Mhm.
So
Right.
if you're saying, let's remove all government funding, you're only going to have more of that. Or you're, I guess, going
Yeah.
to get rid of science, which I hope
Right.
we're not.
And in one of the pieces you've written for HXA, it may have been the interview that you did in our Substack, Free the Inquiry. You talk about, as I recall, it's there. You talked about in the 40s that because universities were reluctant to take direction and research money from the government, they
Mhm.
required overhead indirect cost rates of around 50%. At a time when private industries who were being enlisted into various government projects were requiring
Mhm.
even more. They were requiring 100%, for example. So there was an early phase, and we know now it's become more complex, and there's a variable rate. The different universities they pay different amounts. What I wanted just to mention and get your thoughts on is that things are dramatically changed from a period where universities are reluctant to take federal money. We recently did a podcast with Open the Books, which is a transparency organization, where we went through a lot of the data on the scale and scope of federal funding for universities. And one of the findings that a lot of our listeners were surprised about was that in the Ivy League in recent years, the Ivy League schools make more money, more revenue from their government grants than they do from tuition dollars by quite a large number. That doesn't even include the benefits to
Okay.
universities from the tax exemptions, but just straight up on the grants, they make more than tuition, which raises sort of these questions about what universities and researchers who care about our research most of all, care about our scholarship and our teaching, hopefully care about that most of all, what we owe to the public who's funding it all. And, there's a question about legitimacy, like with President Trump and this executive order, which is causing a lot of consternation in the scientific community. As we know, President Trump was democratically elected. He has, as the head of the executive branch,
You don't
he
have
has
to
certain
remind us.
constitutionally designated powers. Those
Uh,
powers, the parameters
of
of
which
those
the
powers
purse
are
is not one
contested
of
and are
them.
being decided now in courts and so forth. But there is this fact that the executive branch has significant control granted to them by the public to think about these things and to act on them in various ways. There's a long history of presidents being involved in science, but the legitimacy depends on the choice of the people, not on whether the policy is good or bad for science. That's an obvious fact, but I think sometimes in these discussions, people think that if they can show that something, or if they have to have a discussion even like we're about to have, of whether an order is good or bad for science, they are ipso facto, or perhaps in a closet way, in a Trojan horse way, just saying something about the legitimacy of the governing agency. Those are probably two separate issues. There may be some connections within them. If we find that an executive order is bad for science and we think science is good for society, then we might think this executive order is bad for society. But that's just a complicated nexus of things that are background political theory, I suppose. I just want to keep in mind before we launch into executive order. Do you want to say anything more about that, or do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I just want to say that I am very, very far from being a political theorist, and so what I'm about to say is sort of a layperson's view on this. I think, having followed policy a bit, of course, I think that it gets to this tension of what do you believe, or do you prioritize, I should say, free inquiry, or do you prioritize sort of only certain kinds of inquiry? And so in other words, if you, again, don't think that government should be funding research, then I mean, again, I would disagree with it, but that's the end of the discussion, because it's sort of like, well, it doesn't matter what the executive says you can or can't say, or you can or can't study. But I think that most people, and if you look, for example, historically at one of the reasons why the NIH budget, although sometimes presidents and even Congress sort of, well, mostly presidents threaten to cut the budget, it very rarely really gets cut. Now, it may stay flat, which is an effective cut. Okay, fine. Details. Point being, it is enormously popular. It has the word health in it, right? And even if there are problems in it, which honestly, that's what Retraction Watch reports on a lot, at its core, it is a popular idea. So I think there's another layer here of, I don't know how to articulate this exactly, but there's another layer here of what people think is actually happening and what maybe an executive says is happening, right? And that's a whole sort of bunch of discussion of propaganda and what have you.
I like
but
this
on both
guy. Let's
sides.
get him on.
But I think it is complex, I guess, is sort of the answer. I'm reminded of John, this may or may not be a relevant sort of analogy, but I'm reminded of a case that I know about someone who was being sued by a doctor who was being sued because there had been a bad outcome in the pregnancy. The grandmother, who was actually taking care of the baby, sort of recognized that, in fact, she was the one suing because a lawyer had said you should, and you might get money and the rest of it. She said every time she came to that doctor's office, she would say, "You saved my grandson's life," which is true. There was a bad outcome that was utterly unavoidable, which is what the court eventually, or the jury eventually decided. So it's sort of like, well, what are you prioritizing?
Nice.
And
Nice. I'll mention that I was listening to some videos last night, just catching up on news broadcasts. And this will sound very nerdy about my nightlife in New York, but I was I was watching a series of videos of Trump appointees' announcements about how they're running their various agencies. And I spent a lot of time listening to some talks by Robert Kennedy about his role at the agency of health. And one of the things the main point he kept making is that to make America healthy again, we need to make American science healthy again. And what he said was that when his uncle was the president of the United States, and what he sees as sort of the heyday, the high point of American power and prestige in the world, that prestige of American science depended upon this idea that American science was unusually transparent and unusually committed
Pause
to
for a
open
second.
inquiry.
So I do think that the idea of like Kennedy being the time of science being the most open access is a little funny, considering that's, maybe, I guess, depending on what part of the 60s you're in, only 20 years post the Manhattan Project, which was a secret. you know um I don't know. The other thing I think about that is really funny because obviously JFK had a lot of very secretive stuff going on, not in science per se, although I'm sure they did in military science anyway. There was a lot of secretive stuff going on during the Kennedy administration, like Operation Mongoose, for instance. All of the terrorist attacks that we did on Cuba in that time, that was all very secretive, and it wasn't until later that a lot of the details on that sort of stuff came out.
You mean the base of pigs, or?
Well, Bay of Pigs was part of it. That was part of Operation
Yeah.
Mongoose, yes.
Yeah.
As well as a number of other things, but that ultimately led up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we did a bunch of terroristy things against Cuba, and
also like staging coups in other countries because socialism bad.
Right. And I mean, the sordid history, the very real sordid history of communism aside, yeah, I mean, you can't really be shocked that Cuba asked for help when we had tried assassinating their leader multiple times and doing, and funding rebels and things like that. So anyway, well, it's 8:59 my time now, because my time is the only real time. The rest of you time traveling heathens are elsewhere in space. Peter, you could bring it back to our screen, please. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So my hope before the next show is to have the video on what is it called? The one I'm working on currently. Not asymmetric propaganda. We just did that one. The both sidesism video. There we go.
Oh.
So my hope is to have the both sidesism video done before next Thursday. We'll see if that happens, but it should be the case that I should be able to have that up before then. Maybe tomorrow I can work on it. We'll see. we'll see if I can do that tomorrow evening. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see everybody next time. So, thank you guys. Have a good evening.
Hi,
Bye-bye.
everyone.